In this video, I'm going to tell you categories that you can source in 2024 that are going to make your business profitable and successful. More importantly than that, while you're out looking for things in these categories, I'm going to tell you some specific things that you can do that are going to raise your average sale price, help you find better items, and make more money on the stuff that you brought home. And my last tip is going to be specific to you, and it's going to help you be better at this entire thing. One of the first categories I want to talk to you about is vintage sportswear. Let's look first at a jersey that I picked up. And jerseys as a whole are great sellers. And you pick up vintage jerseys, a lot of times they're, $20, $30, $40, even $50. But what I want you to do is while you're picking those up, I want you to find the ones that can really break the top off of this thing. For example, this Atlanta Braves jersey that I picked up had some key indicators that it was more than just a vintage jersey. So let's take a close look at the label. When you see labels like this, where there are other numbers inside, especially if they have chain stitch embroidery, there's a chance that those jerseys are what they call game-worn jerseys or team-issued jerseys. In other words, they actually belong to a player. When you can show that, like on this jersey, I show the jersey on the player. I have the player's number, and I was able to offer a little provenance with it. The jersey goes from being worth maybe $50 or even $100 to $800. It's sold in less than a day. When you're looking at vintage sportswear, always keep your eyes open for anything that would indicate that it was team issued, because when it's team issued, the price rises dramatically. What I want to do in the rest of these categories is tell you what categories to pick in, sure, but I also want you to know one or two key things that you can look for while you're out picking these things that will help you find those rare items that really raise the value and just add to your bottom line. So let's keep going. One of our favorite things to pick up is watches. Watches always sell. There are a few items that you can look for in watches that are going to really pass up that $20 ranking. For example, this is a Seiko watch I sold, but it was made in Japan. So when you're looking, especially at Seiko, when you're looking at watches, look for made in Japan first. They have numbers on the back of them that will help you date them and help you figure out exactly what they are. With watches, especially if it's a vintage watch, you want to look and see those numbers and see if you can identify that exact same one. Also, another key indicator on watches that could drastically raise the value is the word automatic. We picked up, and I've told the story before, but Melody found a margarine tub of watches that she paid $1 for. They were automatic Seiko watches from the late 60s, and we cleared $3,300 within one day on 4 broken watches. But they were all automatics. They were all made in Japan. And so those are things that you can do while you're out picking up watches. Always take a look at them. Keep your eyes open for the word automatic. Keep your eyes out for the ones that are made in Japan. And always, if there's numbers on the back of them and it looks a little bit more rare to you or has a really good feel, look that number up online and make sure you're not holding something that's special. All right, I want to talk about some vintage clothing. Specifically, let's talk about coveralls. Farm wear is super, super hot right now. So even if you're just picking up regular 2000s Carhartt coveralls or overalls, those things are going to sell. But what I want to do is help you find the coveralls that are going to really raise that price up. And there are a few things that you can look for on coveralls that are going to make them drastically more valuable. For example, I want you to look at these coveralls that I found. And these were in an open shed and worn out, full of holes. And from the front, initially, they just looked like old blue coveralls. But there were a few indicators that these might actually be really old. Not just coveralls, but any vintage clothing. First thing I want you to check, make sure it doesn't have a Talon zipper on it. T-A-L-O-N. A Talon zipper helps date it, and it's a high quality zipper, which means it was probably a pretty good item when it was made. The other thing to look for, of course, is made in the USA. And if the item is made in the USA, it's probably a little bit older. When I flipped these coveralls on the back, they had chain stitch embroidery. And I'll try and zoom in so you can see exactly what chain stitch is. But chain stitch embroidery is an expensive type of embroidery. They still do it on things like FFA jackets, but it was much more popular way back in the day. So these coveralls ended up dating to the 1930s, and a pair of coveralls brought $560. What I want you to be able to do is to look at old farm wear, old mechanics wear, and that kind of stuff. And because all of it is pretty valuable, all of it sells pretty well for us, but to be able to know that, hey, I might have something special because it's got a few of these things. Because it's great to get a sale and it's 30 bucks. It's even better when mixed in with those regular bread and butter sales, you can pop off with something that's worth $500. I want to talk to you a little bit about military items. I'm going to talk in this section, let's talk about things other than clothing. For example, I have an altimeter here that would have dated to about the 1940s, and it came right out of the dash. Obviously, they're very rare, not many of them survived, and when you have one in good condition, and believe it or not, this one actually worked. I don't know how accurate it was, but it did work, it did function. You know, something like this, easily $100, but could go for much, much more depending upon exactly what you found. And a lot of the military items like this are also very, very easy to date. If it's US, you can look up, a lot of them will have a contract number on those, or they'll have some other number indicating exactly when it was made. Makes them easy to look up. So when you're looking at military ephemera, military hardware, date it if you can, assign it to a conflict if you can, and if you can assign it to a specific person, a specific soldier, a specific pilot, the value increases drastically. So always watch for military stuff. Military stuff is so easy to sell, but watch for specific things that are going to raise the value up. So this flows right into military clothing. And I know much more about military clothing within the US than I do from outside the US, but there are a few things in military clothing in the US that can really help you identify exactly what you have. So let's talk about what that is. First of all, military clothing sells great, and not just to military people. Even the modern stuff that doesn't bring a whole lot usually sells very quick, especially if you have anything that's new with tags. I don't ever keep that stuff around. It all sells. But military clothing is pretty easy to date, especially when we start talking about vintage military clothing. So they will a lot of times have a DSA or a DLA number followed by either a 100 and then 2 digits or just 2 digits. And the 2 digits are usually the year. A lot of times it's just that simple. There are other things to know that might make it more valuable when you're out looking at things. Let's say you come across an old military jacket. You know it's an old military jacket. You don't really know what it is. If you can identify the service, for example, if it's painted on the back and it's a Navy jacket, well, here's the thing. Army jackets were assigned to a soldier. Navy jackets were assigned to a boat, and they didn't leave. So they're much more rare as a survivor. So when you find a Navy deck jacket, it's going to have some really, really good value. Knowing just a few things about military items, like being able to put a date on it, can really raise your value a whole lot. Also, patterns change, colors change. For example, you know, they've gone through several iterations of green. OG 107, olive green 107 is a very popular color. When you can learn just the basics of what colors were sold, like digital camo, that's not going to be from the 50s. They didn't have digital camo. I found a Mitchell jacket, an actual Mitchell M65 jacket. And that's exceptionally rare and sold for well over $1,000. Just knowing just a little bit makes you really dangerous when you're out and about. All right, let's keep going. One of the things that you need to get out of this video is I didn't find 500 rare pieces last year. I found a ton of stuff. I sold a ton of stuff. I actually have a handful of rare items that make up a significant portion of my overall income because of their extreme value. This video isn't about finding tons and tons of stuff. It's about when you're finding tons and tons of stuff, how can you cherry pick out of that and really maximize your profit on just a few items, because just a few items can make a colossal difference in your overall income. We buy a ton of vintage clothes. Most vintage clothes, again, are going to be in that $20, $30, $40 range, which is great money when most of them can be bought for a few dollars. With vintage clothing, it is really worth your time to get to where you recognize those few items that can run the price up a great deal. I'm going to scroll a few brands that you really should watch for, especially in the vintage clothing market. And I'm speaking specifically about women's vintage clothing because it can make a drastic difference in what you're making overall. And so one of our favorites, gunny sacks. I pick up every gunny sacks that I can find. You're specifically looking for quality, condition, are they made in the USA, other indications that it's got some age to it. And a lot of times with Google Lens, you can find the exact same pattern, because on a lot of these, especially if they're very popular, they will have a name that everybody calls it. Knowing the name of a specific item can raise your price. All right, let's keep going. I want to talk to you about a couple of tech things.